Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's very meaningful to me. ScanCorps has been hugely formative for me as a graduate student at Stanford and now back as faculty. So I'm really thankful to be here. So before I talk about this project, I want to give you a little background of where it's coming from. My work is shaped by many of you in this room, as you'll see throughout this presentation. So a few years ago, John and I were working on this idea of university or organizations as actors, as several of you have. With this idea, thinking about them as organizational actors, one of the core sort of mechanisms we looked at was thinking about the role of managers. In the book, that side was not particularly satisfyingly fleshed out. So we wanted to think a little bit more of it, in part driven by this question that Renata asked at a ScanCorps workshop several years ago when I was presenting about the rise of organizations as actors. She asked, where is organizational actorhood located? So that got me thinking about what it means to be a manager. Where is actorhood located in an organization? The first reaction I had to it was thinking, well, it has to be something to do with executives and managers. These are the people who take on that role. So this concept of hypermanagement has been the result of a few years now of starting to think about where organizational actorhood is located and fleshing out this idea of what managers do when they are leading organizational actors. So today I'll tell you just a few minutes about what hypermanagement is, this concept of the leaders of organizational actors, a kind of definition of it, the role of the university. Universities are central in this process, and some implications for society. So hypermanagement as a concept, just loosely, as I was looking through a lot of the literature on what managers do and managers of organizational actors, this distinction kept coming up over and over. So I've just put together a bunch of the bullet points from all these articles in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. They all have articles saying, what's the difference between a leader and a manager? This distinction is probably familiar to many of you. Managers are who we recognize as technical specialists. They administer. They might be more bureaucratic. It's sort of the scientific management idea. Leaders, on the other hand, are innovators. They disrupt the status quo. They are people-focused rather than systems and structured-focused. So just as a loose distinction, this came up as central. This idea of leader leans more towards hypermanagement. I stay away from that word, leader, because there's a long tradition of what it means to be a leader, lots of different kinds. So hypermanager is this kind of leader, rather than, say, a great man or some other kind of leader. So some of the key phrases that jump out from these texts are things like, leaders must organize workers, not just to maximize efficiency, but to nurture skills, develop talent, and inspire results. Workers need their managers not just to assign tasks, but to show leadership by defining purpose. Influence and inspiration separate leaders from managers, not power and control. Everyone is a leader. This is a different idea of management than many of our theories would discuss. So looking at all of the stuff out there about managers and leaders, we come to this kind of definition right now of what a hypermanager is. So the leader of an organizational actor, with two core dimensions being central to hypermanagement. One is this idea of expanded means and ends. So the ends are innovative ones, not given. I'll give you an example later on. There are multiple ends, not a singular goal. The means of achieving those ends require higher order calculations of how to get there, because everyone is an actor in this system. There are also expanded identities. So this is the everyone is a leader kind of imagery. So the way to coordinate other people, actors in this system, is through giving meaning, inspiring, influencing, not directly controlling. And everyone gets to do it. So in this system, the role of the university is very central, both in how it shapes society and how it is itself shaped. So hypermanagement, I would argue, is increasingly central to both what the university is and what it is doing in the world. So we can think about this in terms of some of the typical things we might think of universities as doing, training and certification for this vision of hypermanagement, maybe especially in business schools, but also in the School of Education, social work, engineering, medicine. These types of classes on leadership, entrepreneurship, how to be more charismatic, you can take them all across the university. Knowledge production and dissemination, of course, ourselves, what we're producing through academic publications, also the guru-type literature, business media, and itself as an organizational actor. So a lot of the trends that we see in universities, I would argue, fit this framework of the university as an actor and its staff, administrators as hypermanagers. So a few examples of this. This is a slide from a leadership class taught by a colleague. It's pretty familiar. So this idea is being taught in leadership classes, that there is a difference between leaders and managers. As another kind of indicator, this is someone's compiling a list of entrepreneurship majors. So this idea that innovation is central is part of this idea. They're just passively collecting, they said. They have 228 majors in entrepreneurship. And then the university as an enactor of the model. So a few examples from Stanford. We offer these two types of training for our administrators. There's the Manager Academy and then the Leader Academy. Part of what I think is interesting about this is that relationship between management and hypermanagement. They do go together, I would argue. And another example, this is our leader, the president of Stanford, who enacted when he started a vision planning process. So part of the idea is there aren't given goals. It's not enough that the university would do research and teaching. We need to have a new vision for what we are going to do. So when he comes in, he starts this new vision planning process. And the way it unfolds is through this highly participatory kind of method. There are lots of parallels to other talks that I've heard. So Woody brought up, for example, who he called the helicopter parent. So the decision comes from the top, but with sort of input all the way along. That's exactly what this process looked like. So here there were thousands of submissions and white papers into this process that over months were somehow magically communicated into, now we have 5 new priority areas. So some of the implications for society of this model. One thing to reflect on is the extent to which it really appears in practice. We heard a great talk about decision-making and the authority of faculty. So we can think about, yes, there are changes in the model, and we expect some variation in how extensively that really changes existing practices. This is about the rise of a new model and where it comes from. This I find quite entertaining. It's a study of Stanford's efforts to encourage entrepreneurship. So they study, we have, I don't know, more than, I think, Tim might know, but we have something like 36 different kinds of entrepreneurship classes and courses at Stanford. So this was, do the programs in the business and engineering schools increase entrepreneurship activity in the real world, with the finding that no, they did not. So the students that took those classes were not more likely to be entrepreneurs. So variation in practice. The other thing to consider is whether this is better. So the normative dimensions of hypermanagement. Certainly the rhetoric is that things like innovation, entrepreneurship are sort of better for society. So they might spur economic growth. They might be more efficient, more productive. They also may increase volatility, reward risk-taking, maybe excessive risk-taking, and promote narcissism. So there are lots of studies about those dimensions in the for-profit world now related to the kinds of traits I would say are linked to hypermanagement. We can also ask whether hyper-managed organizations are more democratic or effective. It's unclear. They may actually be less efficient. So something like the vision planning process that happened, that's a highly time-consuming process. It is not particularly efficient to have buy-in at or to have feedback at every step of the way. The other is it's not clear what to do when there's conflict. So as an example, Google recently had a crisis. They described it as because of their open communication sort of format. It requires strong social controls. So someone posted on one of their message boards that that there were biological reasons that women could not be successful engineers in Silicon Valley, which created a whole uproar in the community. Google fired him, which also created some backlash for creating a kind of strong political social controls, not letting people speak their minds of what they truly believed. So for a system that doesn't have kind of strong hierarchical controls, you might have strong social controls instead to keep everything functioning effectively. So thank you very much.